In the autumn of 1863, something unspeakable took place in the remote mountains of West Virginia. Something that would haunt those who survived it for the rest of their lives.
We must proceed with resolve.
On. What should have been the happiest night of Martha Carver's wedding? 4 people were violently killed in a blood-soaked ritual that local authorities worked desperately to conceal. For more than a century and a half, the real details of that horrific September night have remained hidden in sealed county files, classified statements, and the shaken whispers of a family that controlled one of the largest illegal arms operations of the Civil War era. What you are about to hear challenges everything we think we understand about moral limits inside American families during the nation's darkest period. The Carver family's wedding night tradition was not only disturbing, it was lethal, and evidence suggests that similar rituals may have taken place across several states during the 1860s. Before we continue with the story of the 9 Carver siblings and their blood-soaked legacy, if you are fascinated by hidden American history and dark family secrets, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We explore the most chilling true stories that textbooks leave out. And I'm curious, where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment below with your city or state. Now let's uncover what truly happened in those West Virginia mountains. The Carver family compound sat like a fortress in the rugged hills of what is now Pocahontas County, West Virginia. In 1863, the region still carried the scars of recent statehood and violent division. The area had broken away from Virginia only months earlier, and the harsh mountain terrain provided perfect cover for the family's extensive smuggling network. 9 siblings: Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Caleb, Silas, Abraham, Martha, Rebecca, Judith, and the youngest, Sarah, controlled a system of hidden caves, mountain paths, and abandoned mining shafts that stretched across 3 state lines. The eldest, Ezekiel Carver, inherited not only the family's vast timber business, but also its darker operations from their father, Morai, who had died under suspicious circumstances in 1859. Local records describe Ezekiel as a man of imposing build, with piercing gray eyes and a voice that could silence an entire room. His brother Jeremiah, just 2 years younger, had a violent temper that earned him a fearsome reputation, even among hardened mountain folk who rarely asked about a man's past. The Carver sisters were just as formidable in their own ways. Martha, at 28, had already buried 2 husbands in incidents authorities labeled mining accidents. Rebecca, 26, ran the family's legitimate timber operations with an iron hand, while 24-year-old Judith managed their web of informants throughout the region. The youngest, Sarah, barely 19, possessed an unsettling intelligence that her siblings frequently used to their advantage during negotiations. Their mountain compound included a main house an imposing 3-story stone structure, others surrounded by multiple outbuildings that served different purposes in their criminal enterprise. What neighbors could not see were the extensive underground chambers carved into the mountainside where weapons, ammunition, and other contraband were stored before being sold to both Union and Confederate forces. The Carvers had no political loyalty. They sold death to anyone who could meet their price. By the autumn of 1863, the family was at the height of its power and wealth. The Civil War created an endless demand for weapons, and the Carvers' position along key smuggling routes made them extremely valuable to suppliers on both sides. But enormous profits brought serious risks, and the Carvers developed, increasingly paranoid, ways to protect their secrets and remove potential threats. The wedding that would forever stain the Carver name began as a calculated business deal, as most marriages did in their world. Martha Carver was to marry Colonel Bradford Sinclair, a Confederate officer whose regiment controlled vital supply routes through the Shenandoah Valley. Sinclair, a widower in his 40s, with graying hair and battle scars across his left cheek, had both the military connections and moral flexibility that made him useful to the Carver operation. The courtship was brief and entirely transactional. Sinclair needed reliable weapons for his struggling regiment, while the Carvers wanted military protection and insider knowledge of Union troop movements. The marriage would secure their partnership and provide cover for expanded operations across Virginia and the newly formed state of West Virginia. But Colonel Sinclair was not the only outsider invited to witness the Carver wedding. The family also invited several individuals whose presence that night would prove fatal. Among them was Thomas Hartwell, a federal arms inspector who had secretly accepted bribes from the Carvers in exchange for ignoring illegal shipments. Hartwell, a nervous man with thinning hair and constantly shaking hands, believed he was attending as a family friend, unaware that his usefulness to the Carvers had recently ended. Also present was Dr. Marcus Finch, the family's personal physician and longtime keeper of their medical secrets. Finch had treated countless hunting accidents and riding mishaps suffered by those who crossed the Carvers over the years. His medical bag held not only healing supplies, but also poisons, sedatives, and other substances the family found useful. The ceremony took place on September 23, 1863, in the main hall of the Carver compound. Records show that Reverend Nathan Prescott, a mountain preacher known for his flexible approach to Christian doctrine, officiated the service. About 30 guests attended, most of them family members, employees of Carver Enterprises, or individuals who owed the family debts and favors. Martha wore her grandmother's wedding dress, a cream-colored silk gown carefully preserved despite its age. Colonel Sinclair appeared in his dress uniform his sword gleaming and his medals reflecting the light of oil lamps that lit the hall. To outside eyes, it looked like a typical mountain wedding, though one involving families of unusual wealth and influence. What the guests did not know was that the carvers had planned far more than a simple celebration. As the night wore on and most guests departed, the true nature of the Carver family tradition slowly emerged. For more than a decade, the 9 siblings had maintained a secret ritual they claimed bound them together through absolute loyalty and shared purpose. This ritual, which they called the Sacred Covenant, was performed on major family occasions, births, deaths, and most importantly, marriages. The remaining guests, Connell Sinclair, Thomas Hartwell, Dr. Finch, and a small group of trusted associates, were invited to take part in what Ezekiel described as an ancient mountain ceremony meant to welcome a new family member and secure his total devotion to the Carver cause. It was presented as a harmless folk custom, something rustic and symbolic. In truth, the Sacred Covenant involved consuming a powerful mixture prepared by Dr. Finch using a recipe passed down through generations. The concoction combined laudanum, an opium-based pain reliever, extracts from local mushrooms known to cause hallucinations, and various herbs that intensified psychological effects. The Carvers called this mixture mountain wine, claiming it encouraged spiritual bonding and revealed hidden truths. The ritual was held in a private chamber beneath the main house, a stone-walled room lit by dozens of candles and marked with symbols carved into the rock. These symbols, later studied by historians, appeared to blend Celtic, Germanic, and Native American influences, reflecting the mixed heritage of the region's settlers. As midnight approached, participants stood in a circle around a large wooden table, carved with intricate patterns. Each was given a silver cup filled with mountain wine, and Ezekiel began reciting what he claimed were ancient family vows of loyalty and secrecy, spoken in a mix of English and a German-like dialect. The drug's effects appeared within minutes. Participants felt euphoric, detached, and highly suggestible. Time seemed to slow, and personal boundaries blurred. In this altered state, the Carvers revealed their true purpose. The Sacred Covenant shifted from a symbolic ceremony into something deeply sinister. The Carvers used the drugged state to extract confessions, test loyalty, and enforce submission. What followed would haunt the survivors forever. Ezekiel demanded that each person confess their deepest secrets and betrayals. The drug made deception nearly impossible. One by one, truths emerged. Thomas Hartwell admitted he had shared information about Carver operations with Union intelligence in exchange for immunity. Connell Sinclair revealed his regiment had orders to investigate and possibly arrest the Carver family as enemy collaborators, and that his marriage to Martha was meant to gather evidence from within. Dr. Finch confessed he had kept a secret journal documenting the family's crimes as protection for himself. Even more shocking were confessions from within the family. Under the drug's influence, several siblings admitted long-held grudges, secret deals with rivals, and plans to betray one another. The sacred covenant, meant to strengthen bonds, instead exposed deep fractures and distrust among the 9 siblings. As these revelations surfaced, the night spiraled toward violence. The atmosphere inside the underground chamber grew more tense and suspicious with every passing minute. The drug heightened emotions and stripped away normal social restraints, creating a dangerous blend of anger, fear, and violent urges. Jeremiah Carver, always the most unstable among the siblings, became obsessed with the belief that traitors and spies were hiding among them and had to be dealt with at once. The candle-lit chamber, which had felt mystical and ancient at the start of the ritual, now felt more like a grave. The carved symbols on the walls seemed to twist and move in the flickering light, and the drug-altered senses of the participants made every shadow feel like a threat. The mountain wine had produced a shared illusion of paranoia and aggression that was about to erupt into bloodshed. Ezekiel tried to keep control as the situation fell apart, but even he failed to grasp how strongly the drug would affect both his siblings and their guests. What began as a careful plan to maintain power was quickly turning into something far more dangerous and impossible to predict. The violence erupted without any warning. Jeremiah Carver, his mind completely shattered by the drug mixture and paranoid thoughts, seized a heavy iron candlestick from the table and slammed it down on Thomas Hartwell's skull with brutal force. The federal inspector collapsed instantly, blood spreading beneath his crushed head as his body jerked in its final moments. The sound of Hartwell's skull breakings seemed to awaken something savage and primitive in the drug-clouded minds of everyone present. Martha Carver, despite being the bride, pulled a long-bladed knife from her wedding dress and plunged it between Colonel Sinclair's ribs before he could fully understand what was happening. Her new husband staggered backward, gripping the wound as blood soaked through his uniform, his eyes filled with shock and disbelief. Dr. Finch attempted to escape toward the chamber entrance, but Caleb and Abraham Carver caught him before he could get away. In their drug-fueled panic, they were convinced he was running to alert the authorities about the ritual. Caleb locked his massive hands around the doctor's throat while Abraham struck him again and again with a brass oil lamp until the physician's struggles finally stopped. Colonel Sinclair, badly wounded but still breathing, managed to draw his sword in a desperate attempt to defend himself. The blade sliced across Judith Carver's arm as she rushed toward him, opening a deep wound that sprayed blood across the stone walls. Her scream of pain and fury seemed to energize the other siblings, who closed in on the dying Confederate officer like wolves attacking injured prey. The underground chamber turned into a scene of unbearable carnage. Blood covered the ancient symbols carved into the walls, and the smell of death mixed with the smoke from dozens of still burning candles. The drug continued to surge through their bodies, making the violence feel both painfully real and unreal at the same time, like a nightmare they could not wake from. Ezekiel Carver, the family patriarch who had arranged the entire evening, found himself losing control over both his siblings and his own actions. The mountain wine meant to secure loyalty had instead released their darkest instincts. As he watched his carefully planned ritual collapse into mass murder, he understood that some forces, once unleashed, could never be restrained again. What do you think pushed this family to such extreme violence? Was it only the drugs, or was there something far darker within them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying this disturbing piece of hidden American history. The massacre continued until 4 bodies lay lifeless on the cold stone floor, their blood merging into dark pools that reflected the dancing candlelight. Yet the horrors of the night were not finished, and the surviving Carvers would soon learn that hiding multiple murders during wartime demanded even more desperate actions. Dawn rose over the West Virginia mountains, revealing a scene that would test even the Carver family's long experience with violence and deception. 4 corpses lay in their underground ritual chamber, surrounded by signs of drug use and savage brutality that could never be explained as an accident or self-defense. The surviving family members, their minds still fogged by the lingering effects of the mountain wine, faced the overwhelming task of covering up what had happened. Ezekiel Carver, despite taking part in the bloodshed himself, quickly assumed command with the cold logic that had made him successful in their criminal dealings. Their first concern was disposing of the bodies in a way that would prevent discovery or identification. The family's deep knowledge of nearby cave systems and abandoned mine shafts offered several choices. But they had to move fast before anyone began searching for the missing men. Dr. Finch's medical bag proved grimly useful during the cleanup. The dead physician had brought chemicals and tools that the family used to speed up decay and make identifying the remains far more difficult. They also had access to quicklime from their legitimate limestone quarry operations, which could destroy organic material and erase evidence of their crimes. Colonel Sinclair's military rank created the biggest problem. His disappearance would quickly draw attention from his regiment, and military investigators were often far more thorough than local authorities. The Carvers decided to plant evidence suggesting Sinclair had deserted his post to flee with his new wife to Mexico. A believable story, given how many Confederate officers were abandoning the failing war. Martha Carver, despite killing her husband on their wedding night, proved frighteningly convincing as the abandoned bride. She claimed Sinclair had received urgent orders during the night and left before dawn, taking valuable items and promising to send for her once settled elsewhere. Her performance was so convincing that even some family members began to accept the lie as truth. The cleanup lasted 3 full days and nights. The underground chamber was scrubbed and repainted to hide bloodstains that could not be removed. The ritual table was dismantled and burned, while the carved symbols on the walls were chiseled away and replaced with harmless decorations. Even the silver cups used in the ceremony were melted down and reshaped to erase any trace of their purpose. But physical evidence was only part of the danger. The survivors, family members, and a few trusted associates carried deep psychological scars and broken memories of that night. The mountain wine had created holes in their recollections, making it hard to know exactly what happened or in what sequence. These memory gaps helped in some ways, but they also caused inconsistencies that could eventually raise suspicion. Decades later, a shocking discovery in those same mountains would reveal that the Carver family's crimes went far beyond that single night. If this story is sending chills down your spine, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to support our work. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's uncover together what happens next. In the months after the wedding night massacre, the Carver family's criminal empire began to crack under pressure and internal decay. The trauma of their actions, combined with constant fear of exposure, created a climate of suspicion that spread through every part of their operations. Trust, which had always been fragile, disappeared almost completely. Jeremiah Carver, who delivered the first fatal blow to Thomas Hartwell, suffered the worst psychological damage. He was plagued by violent nightmares and waking visions that made him increasingly unstable and dangerous, even to his own kin. His brothers noticed him staring at his hands for long stretches, seemingly trapped by memories of the blood he had spilled. During business meetings, he would suddenly lash out, accusing partners and customers of being spies or deserters. Martha Carver coped with her trauma in a different but equally destructive way. She became convinced that her murdered husband's ghost haunted the family property and began performing strange rituals to calm his spirit. These secret ceremonies involved burning Colonel Sinclair's belongings and leaving food offerings where she claimed to have seen his ghost. As paranoia grew, the family's business operations suffered as well, weakened by fear, mistrust, and the lingering shadow of that brutal night, they started turning down profitable deals because they believed many potential buyers were secret investigators. Their web of informants and paid officials slowly fell apart as the Carvers grew more suspicious and refused to trust anyone beyond their own family. Several long-standing business partnerships ended suddenly after the siblings accused their associates of conspiring against them. By the spring of 1864, the family's finances were in serious decline. The Civil War was moving toward its end. Others call me, and the need for smuggled weapons was shrinking as both armies neared defeat or final victory. The Carvers were left holding massive stockpiles of guns and ammunition that were becoming harder to sell with each passing month. Their legal timber business was also failing as military contracts were canceled and civilian building projects were delayed. Yet their most dangerous problem was the increasing attention from federal authorities. The disappearance of Thomas Hartwell, the federal arms inspector, who had accepted bribes from the family, sparked an official investigation by Union intelligence officers. Although the Carvers had successfully hidden evidence of his murder, they could not stop investigators from following his financial records and uncovering his ties to their operation. The investigation into Hartwell's disappearance was led by Captain William Sterling, a former Philadelphia police detective who joined Union intelligence at the start of the war. Sterling was known for his careful methods and his refusal to abandon a case once evidence began to surface. Traits that made him especially dangerous to criminal groups like the Carver enterprise. He began by examining Hartwell's financial history, which showed unexplained income far beyond what a government salary could provide. Bank deposits and spending patterns clearly pointed to bribery and corruption, and the timing of these transactions matched known illegal weapons shipments across the region. This trail pushed Sterling to focus on several families and businesses in the West Virginia mountains, with the Carvers quickly rising to the top of his suspect list. Sterling's arrival in Pocahontas County in June 1864 sent waves of fear through the Carver compound. His official authority allowed him to question witnesses, inspect financial documents, and search properties suspected of hiding contraband. Unlike local officials who could be bribed or threatened, Sterling represented federal power that the family could not easily control or remove. Ezekiel Carver met with Sterling twice during the early stages of the inquiry. The family patriarch presented himself as a respectable businessman who claimed to have legally purchased surplus military equipment on occasion. He expressed shock and concern over Hartwell's disappearance, saying the inspector had seemed anxious and distracted during their last meeting months earlier. Sterling, however, was skilled at recognizing lies. He noticed contradictions in the family's explanations. along with signs of stress and paranoia, often seen in guilty people. He also learned that several federal employees who had worked with Hartwell had received warnings about investigating the Carvers, warnings that carried clear threats. The investigation deepened when Sterling uncovered information about Connell, Sinclair's supposed desertion and his marriage to Martha Carver. The timing of the Confederate officer's disappearance, occurring only hours after Hartwell was last seen, was too suspicious to dismiss. When Sterling questioned Martha about her missing husband, her nervous manner and conflicting answers only increased his doubts. As the summer of 1864 continued, Sterling built a grim picture of the Carver family's crimes. While he still lacked direct proof of murder, he had gathered strong evidence of weapons smuggling, bribery of federal officials, and cooperation with enemy forces. The case was moving toward arrest warrants that would shatter the family's power and likely lead to execution for treason during wartime. The Carvers knew their situation was becoming desperate. They had survived the immediate fallout of the wedding night massacre, but the federal investigation now threatened to expose not only their current crimes, but also the murders hidden in their past. Extreme measures would be required if they hoped to avoid justice and protect their freedom. Facing certain exposure and arrest, the family made a decision that would define their legacy and turn their story into legend rather than recorded history. In August 1864, as Captain Sterling prepared arrest warrants for all 9 siblings, the family put into motion a plan they called their final covenant, a reckless gamble meant to either secure their escape or bring total ruin. The plan relied on a massive explosion designed to destroy all evidence of their crimes while making it appear that they had died in an accidental blast caused by their ammunition stores. Through their smuggling activities, the family had access to large amounts of black powder and other explosives, along with detailed knowledge of their underground storage areas that would make such an accident believable. They did not plan to die in the blast. Instead, they intended to use the chaos as cover to flee to Mexico, where many Confederate officers and Southern supporters had already escaped to avoid punishment. Throughout the summer, they secretly moved money and valuables to hidden locations, preparing to abandon their mountain stronghold if necessary. As preparations continued, the emotional damage caused by the wedding night massacre became painfully clear. Jeremiah Carver demanded one last visit to the underground ritual chamber, claiming he needed to complete the covenant with the spirits of their victims. His siblings tried to stop him, but his violent nature made them fear open resistance. On the night of August 15, 1864, Jeremiah entered the caves beneath the compound and never returned. By morning, his brothers went searching and discovered something that shocked even them. Jeremiah had suffered a complete mental collapse and had carved the names of their victims into his own chest and arms. He was found dead in the ritual chamber, surrounded by candles and the remains of their mountain wine mixture. Jeremiah's death forced the family to rush their escape plan. There was no time left to wait or ensure every detail was perfect. Sterling's investigation was closing in, and they had lost one of their most dangerous, yet most devoted members. The explosion meant to erase their past had to happen immediately, before federal agents could search the underground chambers and uncover proof of their crimes. Ezekiel, Martha, and the remaining siblings gathered for what they believed would be their final night in the mountains that had sheltered their family for generations. But as they prepared to set off the explosives, they learned that some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some sins cannot be escaped. On the night of August 16th, 1864, people across Pocahontas County were jolted awake by an explosion so powerful it shattered windows more than 5 miles away and was heard deep into Virginia. The Carver compound, along with much of its underground storage system, was obliterated in a fiery blast that sent flames hundreds of feet into the sky and left a massive crater where the main house once stood. At first light, Captain Sterling and his federal team arrived, expecting to find the burned remains of a criminal empire and perhaps the bodies of their suspects. What they found instead was something far more disturbing. The explosion destroyed most physical evidence of the family's crimes, but it also exposed hidden sections of the underground chambers. In these areas, investigators uncovered human bones buried long before the blast. The remains showed clear signs of violence: shattered skulls, broken ribs, and knife wounds, suggesting brutal deaths, followed by hurried concealment. Most shocking was the discovery of Jeremiah Carver's body in what appeared to be a ritual chamber beneath the original house. The carvings on his body and the occult symbols still visible on the chamber walls pointed to practices far darker than simple arms, smuggling, or bribery. Sterling realized he was seeing evidence of repeated murder and possibly ritualistic cannibalism carried out over many years. Yet despite these horrifying findings, no bodies belonging to the other Carver siblings were recovered. The pattern of the explosion and the spread of debris suggested the blast had been carefully planned by someone with deep knowledge of explosives and structure. Sterling began to believe the family had staged their own deaths and escaped, leaving behind only their most unstable member and the remains of their victims. The investigation dragged on for months, but without living suspects or clear links tying the bones to specific crimes. The case slowly faded. With the war ending and the nation focused on rebuilding, federal authorities lost interest in pursuing a family believed to be dead. The official report labeled the blast and accidental detonation of illegally stored ammunition, listing the Carvers as victims rather than suspects. Local residents never accepted that explanation. Stories spread of strange lights in the mountains, eerie sounds echoing from the ruins, and travelers who felt watched along the old smuggling paths. The Carver name became a symbol of evil and corruption, a warning whispered to children about greed and moral decay. What Captain Sterling never learned was that 5 of the 9 Carver siblings had survived the explosion and escaped to Mexico exactly as they had planned. Martha, Rebecca, Judith, Sarah, and Abraham reached the border only days after the blast and created new lives using forged documents and secret resources they had quietly gathered over many years. Yet escaping the law did not mean escaping the mental damage caused by what they had done. The siblings who survived found that they could no longer trust one another, and their alliance quickly collapsed into fear, doubt, and betrayal. Within 2 years of arriving in Mexico, Sarah Carver was found dead in her hotel room, believed to have been poisoned by an unknown attacker. Rebecca vanished while traveling toward California and was never seen again. Martha Carver, possibly driven by deep guilt over killing her husband, turned strongly toward religion and spent her last years inside a Mexican convent, saying she was seeking forgiveness for sins she refused to name. She died in 1889 and was said to still suffer from terrible dreams about her wedding night. Judith managed to build a profitable business in Texas under a false identity, but she never married or raised a family. Others call me Motherbers later, said they sometimes heard her screaming in her sleep about blood and burning candles. Only Abraham Carver appeared to truly adjust to his new life. He settled in the Arizona territory, became a wealthy ranch owner, and eventually served as a territorial legislator and respected local figure. Still, even Abraham carried the burden of his family's crimes. In personal papers discovered after his death in 1904, he wrote at length about his shame and his belief that the Carver family had been cursed by the innocent blood they spilled. The most unsettling part of Abraham's writings was his insistence that the wedding night massacre was not a single event. According to his journal, the family carried out their sacred covenant ritual many times over the years, and each time it ended in violence and death. The hidden chambers beneath their compound held the remains of at least 15 people killed during these drug-filled ceremonies, including business associates, possible witnesses, and even relatives who had threatened to reveal the truth. Abraham's journals also hinted that similar rituals were being practiced by other criminal families across the Appalachian region during the Civil War. The collapse of law enforcement, combined with easy access to opium and other drugs through medical and military supply lines, created an environment where such acts could survive in remote areas. The Carver family may have been especially brutal and organized, but they were not alone in their madness. Just when it seems the horrors of the West Virginia mountains cannot grow darker, the story deepens. If this tale sends chills down your spine, share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Support the channel by hitting like, subscribe so you never miss stories like this, and stay with us as we uncover what comes next. The Carver family story might have stayed hidden in forgotten records and sealed files, but in 1923, a coal mining project in Pocahontas County uncovered evidence that dragged their crimes back into public view. Miners digging a new shaft broke into part of the old Carver underground, chambers that had somehow survived the 1864 explosion and nearly 60 years of decay. Inside the preserved space, investigators found items that chillingly confirmed Abraham. Carver's written confessions, human bones showing clear signs of violence, lay scattered across the chamber, along with ritual tools, drug preparation equipment, and carved symbols that matched federal investigation notes. Most important of all, a metal lockbox was discovered containing detailed records of the family's criminal acts, including victim names and dates, that matched the sacred covenant ceremonies. The discovery gained national attention and triggered a renewed investigation by state authorities. Newspapers across the country called it proof of America's most evil family and labeled the Carvers the mountain devils of West Virginia. The public was captivated, especially during the Roaring Twenties, when Americans were drawn to stories of crime and moral decay from their past. Yet, the most frightening part of the 1923 discovery was what it revealed about the scale of the Carver family's reach. Papers found in the lock box showed their operations went far beyond weapons smuggling and included human trafficking, organized killings, and what looked like systematic corruption of government officials across multiple states. Letters and financial documents suggested the Carvers were part of a larger criminal network active throughout Appalachia during the Civil War. This network used drug-driven rituals, similar to the Sacred Covenant, to secure loyalty and silence witnesses. The 1863 Wedding Night Massacre was only one moment in a wider pattern of ritual violence, carried out by several families across different states. Investigators tried to trace surviving members of this network, but most evidence was too old to prosecute. Still, they noticed that several prominent families in Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee had histories filled with unexplained disappearances, strange accidents, and sudden rises in wealth during the 1860s. Though proof was lacking, the similarities were disturbing. The investigation also found that some descendants of these families later gained major political and economic power. There was no proof they knew about their ancestors' crimes, yet officials noted that several opposed efforts to preserve Civil War records or reopen cold cases from that era. in 1952. The final piece of the Carver mystery emerged when Mexican authorities contacted American law enforcement about a deathbed confession from an elderly woman named Maria Esperanza, dying in a Mexico City hospital. Maria claimed she had information about American criminals who fled south after the Civil War. She revealed that she had worked as a housekeeper for Martha Carver during Martha's last years in the convent. Martha, consumed by guilt, had confessed everything to her before dying. According to Maria, Martha described the wedding night massacre in detail and admitted it. It was only one of many such acts. Most shocking was Martha's claim that the sacred covenant ritual had been taught by a traveling occultist who promised power over life and death. This man, whose name Martha could not recall, visited several mountain communities in the 1850s and taught the ritual to families willing to pay. The drug mixtures and ceremonies were based on practices he had seen in Europe and Asia. Martha also told Maria what truly happened to the other siblings. Rebecca was allegedly killed by Judith during a fight over hidden money, while Sarah was poisoned by Abraham when she threatened to return to America and confess. Their fear and mistrust eventually destroyed them, even after they escaped justice. Mexican officials gave American investigators Maria's written testimony and several items she said Martha left with her, including a silver locket holding photographs of the 9 Carver siblings and a dried sample of the mountain wine used in the rituals. Chemical testing confirmed the presence of opium, hallucinogens, and other substances capable of causing the extreme mental effects witnesses described. Today, the Carver family compound in West Virginia is marked only by a small plaque that mentions a tragic Civil War explosion and nothing more. It stands as a warning about civilian danger during wartime, but says nothing of murder or ritual violence. Local historians have tried to update the plaque to reflect the truth, but state officials have refused, claiming the evidence is too indirect and the events too disturbing. This silence may not be simple caution. Research in the 1970s by criminologist Dr. Elenina Pemberton of West Virginia University suggested that families like the Carvers influenced far more than isolated crimes. Her work described a network of corruption involving powerful political and business figures whose descendants still hold influence today. Her research ended suddenly after threats against her family and the unexplained loss of her funding. Her unfinished manuscript, donated to university archives after her death in 1995, describes deliberate cover-ups and rewritten history meant to protect reputations built on Civil War-era crimes. The most disturbing part of her findings was evidence of similar ritual sites spread throughout the Appalachian region. Using modern archaeological methods and ground-penetrating radar, she identified at least 12 separate locations across 4 states where underground chambers showed clear evidence of organized violence and drug-fueled ceremonies. Many of these locations were found beneath former properties owned by families who had gained major wealth and political influence during the Civil War period. The pattern was strikingly similar at every site. Underground chambers carved into hillsides or hidden beneath basements. Ritual tools and drug preparation equipment, human remains bearing marks of violence, and strong evidence of careful concealment and long-term cover-up. Dr. Piton believed that the sacred covenant ritual, or slightly altered versions of it, had been practiced by a network of criminal families who used the disorder of the Civil War to remove rivals, silence witnesses, and grow their illegal operations. Her research also revealed signs that some of these families stayed in contact well into the 20th century. Business partnerships, marriages between families, and political alliances followed patterns that suggested continued coordination and mutual protection. While she could not prove an active criminal conspiracy among modern descendants, the statistical chance of so many connections being random was almost zero. The reach of the Carver family's criminal methods went far beyond their direct activities in West Virginia and the American Southwest. By the 1890s, territorial law enforcement officers began recording similar signs of ritual violence and organized corruption within criminal groups across the western United States. Although direct ties to the Carver family could not always be confirmed, the similarities in approach and mindset suggested their techniques had spread well beyond the original group. Detective William Hayes of the Territorial Police in New Mexico compiled detailed reports between 1887 and 1894 describing criminal organizations that used drug-induced rituals to enforce loyalty and remove witnesses. His investigations uncovered at least 6 different groups operating in Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona that practiced versions of what Hayes called covenant ceremonies, closely resembling the sacred covenant found in Carver family records. Hayes's reports, submitted to territorial officials and later stored in state archives, documented a disturbing development in American organized crime. The unstable conditions of the Civil War era allowed criminal families, like the Carvers, to test new forms of control and fear. As the frontier pushed westward, these methods traveled with migrants and criminals who brought them into new territories. Hayes's most detailed case focused on the Brennan family of Colorado, who controlled silver mining through a mix of legal business practices and systematic murder. According to Hayes, others calmly learned their methods from a mysterious figure who claimed to have worked with mountain families during the Civil War. The Brennan ceremonies used drug mixtures nearly identical to those of the Carvers, and their victims showed the same signs of ritual violence. Hayes's investigation ended suddenly in 1895 when he was found dead in his hotel room in Santa Fe, apparently after consuming a fatal dose of laudanum. The official ruling declared it a suicide, citing stress from dangerous work and financial troubles. However, colleagues recalled that Hayes had been hopeful about his cases and had spoken about future investigations, showing no sign of wanting to harm himself. The detective's files were seized by territorial authorities and classified as part of ongoing investigations. When New Mexico became a state in 1912, many of these records were reportedly destroyed during a clerical reorganization, though some historians believe they were intentionally removed to protect powerful individuals and families who had risen in the new state government. As this dark chapter of American history draws to a close, many vital questions remain unanswered, and perhaps cannot be answered due to more than a century of deliberate suppression. The most basic question is whether the Carver family was an isolated example of Civil War-era criminality or part of a much larger network that evolved into something resembling modern organized crime. The evidence suggests families like the Carvers were more common than historians usually admit. The collapse of law and order during the Civil War created conditions that allowed criminal enterprises to thrive in ways impossible during peace. Weapons, drugs, and desperate people were everywhere, creating ideal conditions for the exploitation and violence the Carvers perfected. Let's call me Mother Nature. What makes the Carver story especially is the evidence that their methods and beliefs were passed down through generations. The ritual nature of their crimes, combined with systematic witness elimination and the corruption of officials, shows a level of criminal sophistication that was rare for its time and frightening in its implications. If families like the Carvers truly formed networks of shared protection, and if those networks survived into later eras, then much of American political and economic history would need to be re-examined. Fortunes built during the Civil War, political dynasties born in that era, and patterns of power that still shape society today may have far darker origins than we are taught. The long effort to erase this history suggests someone believes these truths are dangerous. The deaths and intimidation of researchers, missing evidence, and official denials all point to continued efforts to protect secrets that are more than 150 years old. Such determination implies the consequences are not merely historical. In 1889, 25 years after the explosion that destroyed the Carver compound, a dying man arrived at a Catholic mission in El Paso, Texas, carrying the final piece of the family's dark story. Father Miguel Rodriguez recorded the man's confession in his personal journal, discovered decades later in mission archives. The man identified himself as Thomas Hartwell Jr., son of the Federal Arms Inspector, murdered during the wedding night massacre. He confessed that he spent most of his adult life tracking the surviving Carver siblings and documenting their crimes across the American Southwest. His investigation revealed that Abraham Carver's image as a reformed man was false. Instead of abandoning the family's ways, Abraham built an even more advanced operation in Arizona Territory. Using lessons from the Civil War, he formed a network that practiced evolved versions of the sacred covenant ritual to ensure loyalty and eliminate threats. The ritual had changed but kept its core elements: drug-induced altered states, ritual violence, and systematic murder of potential witnesses. Hartwell described at least 8 incidents between 1867 and 1885 where Abraham Carver's group used ritual murder to expand its power. Victims included rival businessmen, honest territorial officials, and even members of Abraham's own organization who showed weakness or doubt. Each killing was carefully staged to look accidental or to blame innocent people. Most disturbing, Hartwell claimed Abraham taught the sacred covenant ritual to other criminal families, creating a network that shared information and protected one another. The wedding night massacre of 1863 was not the end of the Carver influence, but the start of something far more dangerous. Father Rodriguez wrote that Hartwell died peacefully after confessing, relieved to finally share the burden that consumed his life. The priest noted Hartwell carried a leather satchel with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be samples of the drug mixture used in the rituals. The journal states these materials were destroyed in a mission fire just days later. Whether the fire was accidental or intentional was never proven, but Rodriguez recorded that strange men had been asking about Hartwell shortly before the blaze. The Carver family story remains buried in historical archives, a dark chapter few historians dare to study closely. The last confirmed sighting of a Carver occurred in 1891, when a woman believed to be Martha Carver entered a convent in Guadalajara, Mexico, carrying only a small bag and refusing to give her real name. By 1895, all remaining traces of the siblings vanished. Abraham Carver's legal businesses in Arizona were quietly sold to unknown buyers, while his illegal operations simply disappeared. Officials once loyal to him either died in accidents or left the region suddenly, taking their secrets with them. The wedding night massacre claimed 4 immediate victims, but its true toll may never be known. If Hartwell's confession is accurate, the sacred covenant ritual killed dozens more over the next 30 years, while the network the Carvers built continued long after they vanished. Most unsettling is the realization that their use of drugs, ritual violence, and corrupted officials showed a level of organization far ahead of its time. Others, their methods resemble later organized crime, suggesting the Carvers may have pioneered practices that became standard. The underground chambers beneath their West Virginia property were sealed after the 1923 investigation. But the ideas formed there spread across the frontier. The sacred covenant ritual proved to be an effective tool for control and fear. Local communities passed down stories and warnings, forming dark folklore. Children in West Virginia, Arizona, and Texas still recite rhymes about the Carver curse and the wedding night that never ends. Physical evidence has been destroyed or hidden, but the legacy remains in traditions and techniques that survived them. The wedding night massacre was both an ending and a beginning, touching lives far removed from that original horror. As the 19th century ended, the Carver name faded into obscurity, but those who knew where to look could still see its influence in corruption, violence, and ritual behavior across the American West. The sacred covenant binding the siblings may have died with them, but the philosophy lived on with new followers. What began as a family ritual became a blueprint for criminal behavior that shaped organized crime for generations. This story shows how evil can hide behind respectability and how power can corrupt entire communities. The Carver family reminds us that some of America's darkest history remains buried. What do you think of this story? Do you believe such organized evil could have thrived in 19th century America? Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this historical horror, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who values the darker truths of our past. The dead may be silent, but their stories refuse to stay buried.